Hello and welcome to Planet Poetry. I'm Robin Houghton. Now at the moment, Peter and I are on our Christmas and New Year break, but we thought rather than leave you for a whole month before our next episode, you might like to hear an interview from the archive. In this interview, I talked with Caleb Parkin about his excellent first collection, This Fruiting Body. This was back in May 2022, and since then he's had another full collection and a pamphlet. We'll be back with the next new episode on Thursday, the 23rd of January. So until then, I hope you enjoy this revisit of my chat with Caleb Parkin. Caleb Parkin, Bristol City Poet 2020 to 2022, has poems in The Guardian, The Rialto, The Poetry Review, and many more. He won second prize in the National Poetry Competition in 2016 and the Winchester Poetry Prize in 2017. He's a tutor for the Poetry Society, the Poetry School, and others, and he holds an MSc in creative writing for therapeutic purposes. Caleb's debut pamphlet was Wasted Rainbow from Tall Lighthouse, and his first collection is This Fruiting Body from Nine Arches Press in 2021. This year, he'll publish a new pamphlet with Broken Sleep and his collected city poet work. Caleb Parkin, welcome to Planet Poetry. Great to have you here.
Hello, thanks for having me.
This Fruiting Body, I mean, it's a great title, and the cover straight away makes you want to dive in, this extraordinary collage of a person and a leg and a claw of a crab, and then I had to work out what the head was. It's actually a turtle shell, I think.
It is.
A tortoise shell.
Yeah.
You sort of what the hell is going on here? It's just like an explosion of life and nature and all sorts of stuff. And I think that really sets the scene for the whole book. And before we go into more detail of this, I wonder if you could start, in time-honoured tradition, by reading us a lovely poem to get us into the mood.
Yes, absolutely. And this is a great one to start because there were originally, I think, 7 or 8 outdoors store poems because I found them such interesting spaces. And then Jane actually said, I think you can strip those out and just keep 1 or 2. And this was the one that survived, and it was the right one. At the outdoors store. Let's strike poses at the outdoors store. Climb between the covers of the catalogue. Have a ball where the first category is his and hers, and we'll swap the postures. His sat demurely giggling in the tent porch. Hers, foot up, pioneering double knot on a convenient rock. Then let's step out from the pages, collage new ranges of his and his's, hers and herses, theirs and theirses. Let's don waterproof boots in technicolor spots. Let's slide into cagoules in macho shades of cerise. Let's all deck head to toe in sparkly fleece. Then let's go further. Let's decide the category is tent. And we'll become breathable and temporary. We'll stride these catwalk aisles, sassily flapping our vents, our collapsible carbon fibre skeletons protruding, our Velcro mouths serious and fixed. Let's declare the category is rocks, and we'll plonk ourselves in the corners of product shots, fabulously mossy, louche boulders a la mode. We'll collaborate with waterfalls in glitter and foam. Let's declare the category is all the insects not pictured. Category is the mountain itself. Category is the lake itself. Category is the ground itself.
This seems to really epitomise for me the whole book, this idea of subverting categories. And you've got this kind of, you're in a store, but it's also got shades of being on an online shop, hasn't it? You know, trying to scroll through categories to find out what you need. And it's joyful and it's funny, but you come right down to earth, literally at the end, the ground itself. And it strikes me that you're an entertainer, but with a serious heart in your poetry. Do you agree?
I'm a really serious person, which is not to say that I'm not of good cheer. and that I don't experience or recognize the darkness in the world and in our predicaments. But I actually don't, and I think within eco poetry, much of which engages in that darkness really beautifully and lyrically and encompasses some of the grief we feel around it. But I also feel like we're a bit stuck in that mode. And just because I'm being of good cheer and just because I'm being entertaining or humorous doesn't mean I'm not serious. And to me, that's another binary that exists that is unhelpful. So I guess smashing those binaries throughout or not smashing them, dancing with them, tinkering with them. And actually, I love being entertaining at a reading, and that I think you can make a space for some conversations with people perhaps you might not reach otherwise with eco poetry, because there can be this kind of preachiness within eco poetry. I'm experiencing all this grief and loss, and I know what to do about it. Or I'm not saying that's all eco poetry, but it's certainly something I'm mindful of in the work. So I want to invite people into something to have that conversation playfully, and playfully does not mean unseriously.
I didn't even realise till I started reading these poems thinking this is eco poetry, but it's not as we know it. I mean, it just sort of, as you say, it hasn't got that kind of undercurrent of terrible earnestness where you feel you can't crack a smile or anything. And I agree. I think this is a way of reaching people who perhaps wouldn't necessarily want to read poetry because they think it's going to be a bit preachy or a bit serious, but with serious issues.
And this comes from critical reading as well. One of the endorsers of the book, Nicole Seymour, has a book called Bad Environmentalism, Irony and Irreverence in the Ecological Age, which I read. And and lots of eco-criticism, that kind of stuff, I struggle a bit with. And I loved that book because I really kind of felt like, I see what I'm up to, and you realize there's a critical underpinning. And she has some other writing on irreverence and eco-criticism, because actually the reverence, I think, can be a bit of a block sometimes. So I'm trying to kind of simultaneously celebrate and adore the more than human world while also being quite irreverent about it, because I think that's a healthier relationship. I think a relationship in which we're worshipping almost and revering and nostalgifying, that's a word now, this idea of nature isn't a very healthy relationship, is my sense. So I think that's part of what I'm up to with the humour and the playfulness.
Yeah, we'll come on to some more poems where this is evident. I think that you're kind of both celebrating and berating the man-made world. This is a world that I recognise. This is our world that we are embedded in.
I have more to say on the human-made stuff, but maybe we can talk about that with some of the other poems.
We'll get onto that. There is a poem I'd like you to read, Doctoredness, which perhaps moves a bit closer, certainly to begin with, to what we might think of as eco-poetry. Or give us an introduction, and perhaps you would read it, please.
So lots of estuarine places have this ness prefix. There's also a beautiful Robert Macfarlane book called Ness, which is this amazing kind of lyric poem and illustrated lyric poem about an estuary space. Mm-hmm. And for various reasons, they end up being very industrialized, these spaces.
Yeah.
And I think I really love estuary spaces as well. I think of myself as a bit estuary. And I was thinking about, I think I was at Sharp Ness, actually, and was walking with my dogs and realizing how defined by shipping, by industry it was, and then thinking about it as a body. And that's a recurring thing within this poem. And lots of queer eco poetry actually is the physicality and bodiliness within ecology. And this figure of the walkers, there's a few poems, including Outdoors Tour as well, where I want to kind of subvert the idea of the walker and do weird stuff with it. So it's quite an experimental poem, I think, and it took a while to make it. But the walkers became this refrain in the poem almost that felt important. Yeah. Doctoredness. Estuary, untouchable estuary. Every such body sneezes out bridges. Lego brick cooling towers, jagged through walkers' luminous socks. Blue and resistant on the swollen path. Water's brackish meaning mouths over silent ridges, this bent and mottled sky, burnt matchstick trees, flicked from orbit, set down in perfect lines. Walkers' faces ogle in their hundreds. They crackle on the bank, a Nordic pole millipede. Out of touch estuary wants its flesh formally interviewed, invites diggers. Untouched bed where worm faces churn dreams of chimney implementation. Walkers on the bank, an endless perforation. Untouched, touch, retouch estuary, bottle flotsam correlations. Neon beacons pick at this dusk. Walkers, backlit, anonymous interviewees with their chalk membrane dogs. Guttural estuary, insatiable glottal stop estuary, unlit warehouse of stacked tidal printouts. Walkers on hands, knees, elbows, army crawl on bellies, initiate the protocol, administer the remains.
That's a very powerful ending. Administer the remains. And there's no full stop. There's no punctuation. So there's this suggestion of this process that's ongoing and has been going on forever. I like the out of touch estuary. It's kind of been overtaken by something that it can't fight back against. And yet it's kind of inviting industrialization. I'm glad you gave that introduction because the pointed out of Ness, it's doctored -Ness, isn't it? So that helped me understand that. And the fact that the walkers come back each time and then at the end it's really quite sinister, isn't it? With their chalk membrane dogs.
Yeah.
I love the Nordic pole millipede idea, it's got the real visual. And at the end it's an army crawling on bellies, initiating the protocol. It becomes really sinister there, I think. Really interesting.
I guess I noticed that estuaries particularly are militarised, are industrialised, are treated as resource in a way that denies their agency or perhaps their personhood, if you want to kind of go that route of considering, aspects of the more than human world as having personhood, which some legal systems now are recognising rivers as having their own agency and personhood.
Right.
So, so I guess and the walkers coming back as this figure that's there to kind of, as I was, so I think I was going to mention this idea of thoroughgoing irony, because you mentioned earnestness, and so one of my least favorite things is like unacknowledged earnestness. and so I suppose like one of the slight antidotes to that is thoroughgoing irony. It's another Nicole Seymour idea. And when I read it, I was like, okay, I get this now. So, I'm the walkers, like we're all the walkers. I'm not saying I'm different or better here.
Yeah.
I'm engaging in this, I'm there, I've driven there in my car. So I think this idea that you can only write eco poetry if you're pristine and perfect as well, or that you can only engage in environmental activism or politics if you're pristine and perfect is deeply toxic. Part of what I'm up to with implicating myself, the reader, all of us in this, is to kind of try and move through that. Like I'm complicit. We're all complicit, but I'm noticing.
Yeah,
that's something.
And that's the first thing, isn't it? To actually notice
and form a connection and a relationship, maybe, and that relationship might not be an easy one. And certainly in estuaries where I notice the nuclear cooling towers, where I notice the shipping lanes, which is how we get a lot of our stuff.
Yeah,
it's a complicated space, and most spaces on our Earth now are really complicated.
No, I think it's a really thought-provoking way of tackling these topics. Some of these poems are extraordinary. This rather long poem, Watership Down Fugue, which I understood it as putting men dying of AIDS into a scenario where the characters in Watership Down are dying of myxomatosis. It's very strong and disturbing.
I hope if a reader is really with the book that they'll go with me on that quite long poem about quite personal experiences, but also quite universal experiences. Yeah. It's this kind of human, non-human kinship. It's working with popular culture. It's a lot of things that I'm kind of into. And because it was also a way of me thinking through as a gay man who grew up in the shadow of HIV/AIDS, like it was a lens through which I felt I could approach that. While also engaging in my obsessions of more than human life. And because I did grow up in a setting where we found rabbits with myxomatosis,
right.
and which is very much a kind of human introduced disease in the rabbit world.
Now, one poem which I was puzzled to see, I'm asking you to read some of the ones I was puzzled by.
Oh, I love that. I really like your choice of poems, actually. These are some of the quieter and stranger poems, and that's great.
Because I always sort of think it's a good opportunity, to hear from the poet's mouth, as it were, a little bit about the background or whatever, and also just to hear you reading it. And this one is Tree Triptych.
Yeah, Tree Triptych. I started thinking about, I guess, our relationship to trees, and then I set up this triptych in the poem, which is epistolary. So it's 3 short letters between trees, men, and saplings. But sort of saplings are sort of young men and young gay men, particularly, I guess. And I don't know, I wanted it to be this strange triangle between those where men became trees became men. And I sort of merged all 3 as a reflection, a sort of intergenerational reflection on how things might have changed for younger queer people. I think, well, as you hear in the poem, a moment of walking past 2 young guys holding hands and thinking like, I've never felt safe to do that in a built up context. There's another poem, which Kind Words About Darkness, which is about walking in the dark and holding hands and engaging through touch. But I don't feel safe doing that in a city. That's partly because of my experiences growing up. Some are really homophobic. And anyway, so but then bringing it together with this idea of trees and being, am I a man, am I a tree? Just really kind of playing with those ideas. Tree Triptych. Dear men, is it right that we peer beneath your skin? In summer light, your arms are curved roots planted in the bright grass of teeming parks. You generate energy on trendy drop handles, bristling and bipedal, the strands of your triceps bracing firm and furry hands. Your fleshy trunks heft evergreen carrier bags, grasp lovers as if love was a real and vital fungus. Yours affectionately, Trees. Dear trees, is it wrong we objectify you this way? Your leaves offer gruff green nothings across dusty lanes, stamp shadows on hairpin roads. On prime hillside you huddle and creak, gesture resolutely skyward as you rehearse at being lecterns, desks, gavels. As your mycorrhiza disintegrates, you dig into cellophane diets with the tips of roots. Yours suspiciously, saplings. Dear saplings, I saw 2 young men, barely with shadows, wisp along, fibres of their fingers entwined, oblivious to all the winters, the climates changed before and beneath them. So many red carpets and bloodied noses in backstory, unnoticed. May these saplings grow together, despite this world of unreadable tattoos, rotted maps. Our copse of rough bark and queer blights. Saplings, I want so much to revel with you, for you. But how can I when we're all in this delicate forest, here on the brink of night? Yours in hope, men.
So it ends in hope, at least. But yes, when I read this, I was a bit confused because I thought all saplings are trees anyway. So I hadn't thought of the saplings as being young men.
I suppose it's a strange one because it sort of merges those 2 categories again in the third piece.
And I rather like this talking almost not cross purposes, but in a slant way to one another, as if, are they actually listening to one another or not? I'm not quite sure, really.
Yeah, it's a bit like a triangle, but where each of the lines is just going off into kind of its own space in a way. But I suppose, I think part of what my thinking was around, how things change intergenerationally for queer people. But also, I feel like intergenerationally and environmentally, there's this kind of being on the brink of night, and it can feel like that. And it can feel like that about LGBT rights too. I certainly feel at moments that our rights could be taken away very quickly. But it's nice seeing young people who feel really confident in their queerness. And it's kind of, it can feel kind of strange if you grow up in a context of, for my generation or half generation, in a context of censorship. And for my elders, growing up in a context of illegality.
Yeah, illegality and also hiddenness, totally out of sight.
And talking about this poem now, and I don't think I've ever realised this, that's certainly a part of them all missing each other. So there's a hiddenness or kind of, and there's a tenderness, and I think, and certainly, you know, and an appreciation of men's physicality, but they're trees, but, you know, so that's in there, but is also kind of tinged, I think, with doubt.
Now, I would like to ask you to read this Christopher Smart
cover.
The cover version, yeah. I mean, what has he been? Is this Jubilate Annu? I mean, has this been covered many, many times?
Oh, yeah.
But we love it, don't we? And to actually find, you know, new riffs on it, I think is great stuff. You have to explain that in the title, Norma is GNORMA, I think, because that's the sort of visual gag from the start, isn't it?
I pronounce it Gnorma throughout,
okay.
Just to add the G in, yeah. And when I perform this live, I like to situate Gnorma somewhere. If it's on Zoom, then I'll put Gnorma behind me on a green screen. And if it's live, then I'll put Gnorma into the space and address her because it's fun to do so. So the poem's called For I Will Consider Gnorma the Asda Pride Gnome. It's like a Marmite poem, and some people love it, and some people hated it. And thankfully, Jane really loved it. I had great fun writing it, and it's really fun to perform. And as you say, it's part of a lineage. And actually, I think that's great. You know, I see it as being in a lineage of these praise poems after Christopher Smart's Jubilate Agno.
Yes.
And I was trying to find a way to respond to Gnorma, the Asda Pride Gnome, as an element of our material culture. I felt thoroughly ambivalent about. Actually, a friend recently sent me, I had COVID, and a poet friend very kindly sent me a tiny Gnorma that I've now got in a flower pot. So I'm really glad.
Really?
For I will consider Gnorma, the Asda Pride Gnome, after Christopher Smart's Jubilate Agno. For her pointy hat matches her tiny rainbow flag. For she sports a blood-red price tag of £22. That was at time of going to press. She's now £28, by the way. For her cheeks are flushed with the exertion of generations of activists. For she is Walmart's canary. For she wears pink and blue in ironic dismissal of gender binaries. For her painted mouth is open, as if to declare that, finally, we are special enough to be in the seasonal goods section. For the plastic compounds of her body are prehistoric, for there are velociraptors behind her mass-produced eyes. For she is the modern shopper's terracotta army. For her bearded accomplice, Gnorman, is her partner only in corporate cosplay. For the stubby wave of her greeting is about to clench into revolt. For she is the herald of unquestionable change. For her comfy pastel loafers sprint from shame. For she makes cold warehouses into pride parades. For she stands in solidarity with her inert comrades. For she yearns to fight giant windmills on rockeries. For in landfills they will backstroke with sun-blistered skin. For they are perfect throwaway accessories. For they propagate acceptance like desperate bees. For it was Gnorma's queer shovel that dug our victory. For the Gnormas have come to save you. For the Gnormas have come to save us all. For praise be to Gnorma. For I am Gnorma, and she is me.
Ironically dismissing gender binaries, wearing pink and blue. And yet there is this sense that, you know, Asda is putting something out for pride. That's something, isn't it, as a start?
Yeah. Who said poetry is the strong expression of mixed feelings? And and I think, for me, like, this is one of my poems. It's very playful, but it's a very strong expression of mixed feelings. And certainly, on the one hand, sure, it's great that Asda are embracing pride, but they're only embracing pride for profitability. It's pink washing. And obviously, like, most of these will, as I say in the poem, end up in landfill. It's more plastic crap.
Yeah. The perfect throwaway accessories, as you say.
Which I grew up in an era when that was the way it was acceptable to be gay. Like, do you know what I mean? And there's you can be the gay best friend. You can be,
yes, yeah.
You know, you can't be problematic or tricky or empowered or sexual. You can be a throwaway accessory. Yeah. So that line for me, I always say with some venom.
Now, I haven't really asked you about your role as Bristol City Poet. And how did you get into that role?
Yeah, so I'm coming towards the end of my tenure of 2 years. I'm really glad that they do it for 2 years because, as we know, poetry happens in sort of deep time, geological time. So it's nice that there's some space to develop the role, and I've really loved it. Actually, it's been I mean, may you live in interesting times, and blimey, we do.
Yeah.
I got into it by applying, and I really went for it, feeling like this is a good time for me to do this because themes of environment and inclusive environmentalism and writing for well-being. So I studied an MSc creative writing for therapeutic purposes.
Right.
And so that kind of therapeutic awareness at a time when so many people were experiencing various traumas, and how I approached my commissions and my work with that awareness, I was like, I did feel going into it, I was like, no, this is a good moment for me to do this. Yeah. And that was a nice feeling. So part of the role is to respond to big cultural events and happenings through commission poems, through some public-facing events. And I've written commissions. Actually, I'm going to share one of those as my additional poem, which I could do in a moment if that's okay.
Yeah, definitely.
But of course, we've been living at a time when events don't happen, or they happen in a very modified way. It's been a good challenge to respond to that in a way that feels congruent. I've got 3 more commissions that I'm working on. I've just done one about local democracy in a non-partisan way, and I did an alpha poem. So an abecedarian, which mentions all the wards in Bristol and lots of ways people can get involved in local democracy for whichever party they're involved in.
Excellent.
I know, and I'm struggling to not say what I really think about that right now.
That's a problem of being a poet laureate of any type, isn't it, I think?
You know what? I think it's a really interesting challenge. So, I've been asked to write things responding to the pandemic and lockdowns and loss, which I wrote as a sonnet. Recently, I've been asked to respond to forced migration, to refugees. I say forced migrants usually. And I'm going to do that in a really collaborative way because I don't have lived experience of that. But what I'm hoping is that commission I might not even be in that commission, but I might have stewarded the process. So I think there's moments when that's the important thing, to get out of the way or acknowledge your positionality within the poem.
It sounds really interesting, really interesting. So as we're sort of on that topic, is there something you wanted a new poem that you'd like to read, something that's not in the collection or something a bit different?
Yeah. Definitely. So this one is interesting because it never saw the light of day or the light of the event it was meant to be at. It was to commemorate the 80th anniversary of the Atlantic Charter. And this was 1941 charter between the UK and US about American and British goals for the world after the end of World War II. So this, again, is an interesting moment when I was like, not sure about military might of the UK and the US. And it was meant to be an event where there were dignitaries, ambassadors, all of these folks involved, many naval people as well.
Yeah.
So, it's thinking through what's going to work for them and what's going to work for me.
Yeah, yeah.
So I wrote a poem that takes Macefield's Sea Fever as its basis. So it's very lyrical.
Yes, lovely.
It was going to be on this event on SS Great Britain. So it's very shippy. And I was thinking about that thought experiment, the ships of Theseus, or the ship of Theseus, which is that if you replace all the parts of the ship, is it still the same ship?
Interesting.
And I was thinking about peace and building peace. So it plays on that idea of shipbuilding and peace building. And it felt very current now. So I wanted to share it. It's got 2 epigraphs, one high cultural and one pop cultural.
Okay.
So this is from The Ships of Theseus by Steve Gurker. Every ship like a casket of words, bulkhead, transom, mast steps. And that's from The Ships of Theseus. And the alternative one is from Only Fools and Horses, where Trigger says, this old broom has had 17 new heads and 14 new handles in its time.
An excellent parallel.
Anyway, so long introduction, but yeah. Here it is. And there's lots of plays on words with the prefix ship in it. Peace building. To build a peace, you'll need heartwood timber from forests with a steady breath. And you'll sometimes need steel, the galvanized kind, shielding lights over turbulent decks. For a peace that's strong, build a singular hull, but with boundaries welded within, and a solid wisdom to endure the dark whirls, a knowledge that water will win. To build a peace, you'll need a rudder that holds firm to a stately stern, and a deft propeller to trouble the currents, a flag to welcome or warn. For a peace that endures, choose a sturdy design from a peace-right's weathered hands, and the hands of the peace-wrecked, your peacemates too, gathered over peace-shaped plans. To build a peace, you'll need mast steps or crow's nest, a radar to broaden your view, and to heed the albatross's gossip, sense the squalls that swell within crews. For a peace that won't rot, weld 2 lucky coins beneath your peace's upright heart, then renew each rusted bolt until peace, unfamiliar, gleams into port.
That's lovely. Very clever.
Thank you.
I liked all the references in there as well, including the albatross. And, I sort of think I'm trying to picture being a traditional kind of military person listening. And there's nothing there to be offended by. And it's certainly thought-provoking.
But I feel like I smuggled through some ideas if you look at the imagery that...
Yeah, you're feeling a bit clever, aren't you? A little bit subversive there on that one.
well, I just feel like, it's about peace, which, of course, sometimes the armed forces are part of peace.
Should be the aim, shouldn't it?
Yeah, right. But as peacekeeping forces, I don't think that's always the case. But anyway, I felt like the musicality of that poem carried it along. And when you spent time with it, it would ask you some questions that might be helpful for people in that world. So I think with all of these commissions, I see them as gifts.
Yes.
And I have to think about who that gift is for. And doing that's really a really nice process, actually. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. It's really interesting. Now, there's time for one more poem, I think. And there's this one, Winged Insects at Literary Events, another great title. And I think there is this great tradition of poems about poetry readings, isn't there? And I think we need to just throw one in there for our listeners' delectation. So perhaps you might give us a rendition of that poem.
Yeah, certainly. It's playful, but this is also some thoroughgoing irony that I mentioned. It's like this is me. While the world is disintegrating, we're here reading poems, and that's lovely. So,
I completely understood that. Yeah.
Great. Winged Insects at Literary Events. 1. While the poet intones, gestures at that vital word, a translucent daddy longlegs zigzags along the beam of a spotlight. Contained in that diagonal column of dust, it hurtles up like a planet swallowed by an imploding star. 2. The interviewer offers significant nods, head tilted at all this heightened knowledge, while a fly lands on the bookshelf, rings its wings, fitful and ready. 3. The speaker points a laser towards their compelling ideas, slide by slide, click by click, building, cogent, persuasive. In the middle of the screen, as a huge moth rests there, its wings a mystery, a tattered cloak, its whole being a comma, deleted in a thesis.
We can get as jumped up, as techy and as controlling of the world as we believe we deserve to be, and then some flipping insect jumps in and makes a mess of it.
Yeah, and I was thinking then that it's also that kind of non-human kinship coming in again for me, is that actually sometimes at an event I notice the non-humans, and I don't know, I'm a bit obsessed with them, and those are all insects I genuinely noticed at literary events. I don't know, and aren't we all a comma deleted in a thesis?
Yes, I think that sums it all up perfectly, actually. Well, this has been really, really interesting and fun. This Fruiting Body by Caleb Parkin, published by Nine Arches Press. Highly recommended. And it's your first full collection, isn't it? Although you've had other pamphlets out, haven't you?
Yeah, first full collection. And I've got Wasted Rainbows with Tall Lighthouse. I think they've still got some. And there's only 6 poem crossover, just to say.
Oh, excellent.
Coming up in this year, I've got a pamphlet with Broken Sleep in October called The Coin, which is much more, it's not kind of, there's a few eco poems, I guess, but it's much more about matriarchs and cancer and place and class and all these kinds of things. It's all kind of in there. And it's quite different work. And I've also got the collected City Poet poems will be coming out in September. So I've got a couple of publications coming up.
Excellent. And clearly you've got stuff that's keeping you busy, even though your tenure is coming to an end as Bristol City Poet. So
I'm always spinning many plates. Yes.
Well, thanks ever so much for taking the time to come onto the poddy and chat with us, Caleb. It's been fantastic.
Thank you. It's been great fun.